In Fool Night by Kasumi Yasuda, the act of turning into a plant, or transfloration as it's called, is a melancholic affair. A sacrifice made by those with nothing left to lose in order to secure the future of mankind. It's a horrific but slow, almost peaceful process that ends in a plant outwardly no different than any other. This is not a video about Fool Night. Wild Strawberry is a manga by Ire Yonemoto that has been serialized in Jump Plus since July 2023. It's one part post-apocalyptic thriller and one part what if COVID turned you into a plant. And personally, I think you should be reading it. Its premise is deceptively simple. 36 years before the story begins, Tokyo is suddenly overrun by plants. Nobody knows why or how, but in an instant the city is ground to a halt. However, not only is the city now covered in plants, but turns out those plants are parasitic. They infect the human host and absorb nutrients from them until they bloom, killing the host in a flora explosion and fully transforming it into its final monstrous form, the Jinka. These are the monsters that have turned Inner Tokyo into a hellscape, and these are the monsters that provide us with one of my favorite lines in anything I've ever read. Here in Tokyo, flowers are stronger than guns. But as bad as that sounds, this isn't an end-of-the-world situation. Surprisingly, society still continues on. Rent is still due. You still have to go to work. All because you can ward off Jinka infection through a simple vaccine. A vaccine that is no longer free. The farther you get away from Tokyo Tower, the source of the infestation, the safer it is. So if you have the money to get vaccinated and live outside the city, life continues on pretty normally. But if you don't, well, good luck. It's a very fascinating take on a post-apocalyptic setting, one that, for some people, is really not apocalyptic at all, and one that you'd have to assume is inspired by the events of the last few years. It's a setup that instantly grabbed me and had me interested for more, not the least bit because it gives me some of those sweet, sweet Chainsaw Man vibes. That comparison is unfair to Wild Strawberry, I know, but between the devil-like Jinka, the functioning society that kind of just accepts this new level of death, and the government agency tasked with handling the monster killing, there's clearly some DNA spliced in here. And it doesn't really stop with just the world building. The story itself follows Kingo, an orphan teenager trying to make ends meet while living with his sister Kayano in Inner Tokyo. The area of town so dangerous, our introduction to Kingo is him just narrowly avoiding getting eaten by a Jinka on his way back from the store. Don't worry, the landlords are still around though. At least the part of Tokyo where you can die at any time inside or outside your home has the lowest rent. How considerate. But they're not just living there because they're broke. Turns out Kayano is a Jinka host, and if they're found out, she'll be executed. Except instead of waiting in agony for her death through bloom, she's already bloomed once before, all while retaining her humanity. I think you can see where we're getting a little sauce here. I'm now going to spoil the end of the first chapter real quick, so if this at all sounds interesting to you, go give it a read and then come back. Or if you want, you can skip to here. So the moment that really sold me on this series is Kayano's second bloom, or more specifically, Kingo's death. I don't know where I thought this story was going up to this point, but I 100% did not expect the presumed main character to get domed in cold blood in the opening chapter. It's done so viciously that I really just thought, oh, this was all a ruse, Kayano is the actual MC. Ultimately, she revives her brother by essentially becoming his new heart, and we align back with a more standard shonen MC. Did I mention that there maybe is a little Chainsaw Man DNA here? But that moment at the end of chapter 1 has to be one of the absolute peaks so far. A powerful scene in its artistry, but also its cruelty. A peak that not only sets up some pretty lofty expectations for Yonemoto's storytelling, but locks in the nature of the world they are creating. It really was impactful enough to get me into the series itself, and part of that was the shock of it, which is why I wanted to avoid spoiling it for people if possible. But if you are still on the fence, I do urge you to at least read the first chapter, and if it's still not your thing, then what can I do? Now with all that out of the way, how is the manga 15 chapters in? At the moment, the story itself is certainly buoyed by a level of intrigue the world building has created. Why did this event happen in Tokyo? What are the Jinko? Why can a vaccine ward off blooming? Where even is the story going? There's a lot of questions, and we're just beginning to get some hints as to what the answers might be. What we've gotten so far has been great, with enough crumbs to keep me engaged as the story progresses, but at some point, those questions will have to be answered, and that will be when the story's metaphorical rent comes due. I will say though, the overall tone has been a bit lighter than what I was initially expecting. Especially with how serious the opening chapter is, there are a few more jokes than someone looking for this setting played completely straight might prefer. So your mileage may vary here. Again, I swear I will stop mentioning Chainsaw Man, but think that kind of level of humor interspliced in, although not as funny at the moment. I don't mind having some comedy to take the edge off of a grim setup, particularly since it has not fire forced any serious scenes up to this point, but I know some might. In fact, if you're looking for a much more serious exploration of a post-apocalyptic Japan where people sometimes turn into plants, I really do recommend Fool Night. And if you don't believe me, I implore you to check out Lines in Motion's wonderful video on it to learn more. But in Wild Strawberry's case, I have to emphasize that you're getting what you pay for here with the demographic. The shonen runs deep here, and I mean deep. An MC with a superpower inside them that they can't quite control, a quest to turn your sister back into a human, a squad of teammates including a quirky girl and a calm, dark-haired guy. It comes with the territory. I don't know why you'd be reading something in Jump Plus if you don't like shonen, but I do feel the need to call that out here and specify that I do like shonen. I think this story has done enough up to this point to avoid any generic allegations, but again, your mileage may vary. Even if the main organization in Wild Strawberry has the goofiest name I've ever seen. Seriously, I realized this was not going to be the solely grim, dark adventure I thought it was when they announced that the Jinka-killing super soldiers were called the Flower Funeral Force. Ire Yonemoto knows writers who use subtext and thinks they're all cowards. Recently, as of this writing, the story has just introduced a different, more clandestine group called the Black Lily, which is a cool way to do a plant-based name, instead of naming it the Forbidden Flower Family or something. Naming convention aside, the Special Flower Funeral Force are cool, actually. Hunters who willfully get parasitized and store their Jinka in a giant pair of pruning shears to give themselves superhuman powers. All the best fights so far have featured a Special Force member, and I imagine that will not be changing anytime soon. The fights themselves are fast-paced and feature weighty attacks and a good number of two-page spreads. The fights are good, and as we finally begin to expand that power system, I imagine their quality will only increase from here. Fortunately or unfortunately, that is kind of the caveat I have about everything so far. For just 15 chapters in, I think the story is in a really good spot, and I'm excited to see how it continues to twist some of these shonen classic ideas into its own unique image. But like a lot of manga, it's going to be the next 15 to 20 chapters that ultimately decide its fate. More than anything though, what initially drew me to Wild Strawberry was its art, and that's been top-notch from chapter 1. Yonemoto's ability to draw environments just completely overrun with foliage in a natural but extremely unnerving way shines from the opening pages. And then that absolute bombshell of a colored two-page spread was all the convincing I needed to continue reading. The background work and the small environmental details are not second thoughts here. Clearly, the work of an artist dedicated to depicting their world in all the run-down, plant-covered degradation it deserves. The monster designs are some of the weirdest freaks I've ever seen, generally leaning towards human-shaped body horror, but occasionally just going full bananas. Still, the core element of the design is always plant-based. They're always grounded in something, often attacking with Venus flytraps or along vines. I'm so thankful this is not on the usual weekly cadence, because so much of the quality comes from the capacity to depict these plant abilities and plant life forms with the detail they require. So much of the simple stuff clearly requires just that extra time that Shonen Jump so rarely offers its mangaka. Some of Yonemoto's more detailed backgrounds are things that I think would just drive someone insane working on them on short deadlines. I love that sometimes chapters just take longer to come out. There have been a couple cases where instead of a chapter, Wild Strawberry will just have these cute little 0.1 chapters that are just pieces of art from Yonemoto with an apology about the delay. Like, no, please don't apologize, take all the time you need. For a story with as solid roots as this, it really is a surprise to see it fly so far under the radar. I haven't heard much of any chatter on it since the first chapter dropped last year. While the perks of the release schedule in Jump Plus far outweigh any perceived negatives, its inability to be used as a main magazine flame war measuring stick has left it without much mainstream attention, but also given it time to continue along unbothered. I really do think something is cooking here, and I really do recommend that you check it out for yourself. This early on in the series, the cost of entry is pretty low, and then you can tell everyone you were in on it from the beginning. While I did enjoy joking about the inspirations the manga clearly wears on its sleeve, it's important to remember that there is only one Chainsaw Man. But hopefully, if Ire Yonemoto is able to continue to grow and flourish as an author, one day we'll be able to say there's only one Wild Strawberry, too.